Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. What a season opener that was, eh? That Australian Grand Prix nearly had a little bit of everything. We had an aborted start, we had do not starts, we had pit lane starts, we had do not finishes, crashes, a fight for the win. It was changeable conditions, rain, no rain, sun coming out, rain again. It was wild. We have so much to talk about, so we're going to get right into it. Now, with our race reviews, we always do it in championship order from the previous season. So we'll be kicking things off with Sauber and finishing with the reigning champions McLaren. And our first driver to talk about is Gabriel Bortoleto, who qualified 15th, did not finish. Feel really bad for Gabriel because we know he's a very talented driver. He, like all of the rookies, was just in an incredibly difficult situation for his first race. It was raining, the conditions were ever changing, the rain was on, the rain was off, it was intermediates and then slicks and back to intermediates. It was chaos from start to finish. We had some of the most experienced drivers really struggling to control their cars, dropping wheels onto curbs, spinning out, and unfortunately for Gabriel Bortoleto, he did crash out of the race. I don't know why though. I don't know whether the replays never, because it kind of happened at a time when there was quite a few crashes and there was a lot going on. And I don't know whether he dropped a wheel onto the grass and lost control of the car, which we've seen happening quite a few times. I don't know, something to do with his rear suspension. It looked broken, but I don't know whether that was the cause or the effect. The replays never really stuck on it for long, so because it just kind of sort of switched to the next one, and then there was all this stuff happening in the pits and everything. It was chaos, so I'm not entirely too sure why he crashed. But regardless, a very unfortunate end to Bortoleto's first F1 race. He's not alone as the only rookie to crash out, and we'll come on to the rest of them shortly. He did also incur a 5-second time penalty for an unsafe release, which saw him nearly colliding with Liam Lawson. It was very, very close. Now, because he's not finished and he's not actually been classified, so that 5-second penalty will carry over to next week's race in China, which, again, is probably going to be a little bit of a struggle for these guys because it is a sprint weekend, so they're going to have even less time in the car for practice on that track. So I imagine next week is also going to be a little bit chaos. Carrying on to his teammate Nico Hülkenberg, who qualified 17th and finished 7th. Can I just say, for Hülkenberg to be in what I originally thought was the slowest car, I don't believe that anymore. I think there is another team that is actually slower than them. Hülkenberg did an incredible job to go from 17th to 7th. Yes, he has benefited from 6 cars either not starting the race or not finishing the race. So there's already a 6th place jump there. But to go in, get into the top 10, defend that position and get P7 is mighty, mighty work considering some of the cars that are behind him. I'm not surprised that Hülkenberg has managed to score some points because he is that type of driver. He's one of those drivers that if there's some points available, he's just going to kind of be there to take them. And that is clearly on show today. He was there to pick up the points for that team. That team has now scored in one race more points than they did the entirety of last season. And they are sitting above Ferrari in the championship. Who would have thought that Kick Sauber is above Ferrari in the championship? They are actually the highest sitting Ferrari-powered team in the championship. I'm kind of now of the belief that perhaps Sauber aren't as bad as what we initially thought them to be. However, it's only race 1, so we'll see what happens. But well bloody done to Nico Hülkenberg. Incredible result. And he should be very, very happy with himself. Another driver who should be incredibly happy with himself is Alex Albon, who qualified 6th, finished 5th, was promoted to 4th, and then demoted back to 5th. I have to say that's an incredible result for Albon to be scoring those big points with Williams. He did some fantastic, fantastic defensive driving out there. He was not willing to give up those positions for love nor money, and it was a fantastic showing for Albon. Now, it is a shame that he was promoted to 4th and then demoted back to 5th. We'll come on to that a little bit more when we come on to talk about Kimi Antonelli, because that is the reason why he was promoted and demoted. And it is a shame for Albon, but it is still an incredible amount of points that he's managed to score for that team, especially when the other driver didn't manage to score any at all because he didn't actually start the race. Carlos Sainz qualified 10th, did not start. Incredibly unlucky for Carlos Sainz, who spun into the wall during under safety car conditions. He was coming around the final few corners, put a little bit onto the accelerator, and I think it might have been an upshift issue, and there was just a little bit too much torque in the car, and he lost the car and just spun into the wall. It ended his race. James Vowles says they don't really know and they don't understand why he's crashed. They're going to go and look at the data and see what's happened. I will say though, as great as Alex Albon's driving was, part of that also needs to go to Carlos Sainz, because he almost just assumed a strategy role for that race. He helped the team make the decisions that helped Alex Albon get that P5. He used his experience to help Williams make the right choices in terms of tyres and when to come in and what to do. And very well done to Carlos Sainz. So it's great to see that the team is benefiting from having someone like Carlos Sainz on the team. And I have to say, it's just so nice to see Williams. It's so nice to see a good result for Williams. The faces in the garages, as soon as Carlos Sainz went into the wall, the cameras cut to the mechanics in the garage, and it was almost like it could have been 2024 again. So I'm glad that with that little bit of heartbreak that came from Carlos crashing, there is so much positives coming out of that. He did manage to get that car into Q3. Albon managed to get that car into a higher position in Q3 and managed to score huge points for the team. So they should be very, very happy, considering the fact that this time last year they had an overweight car, they weren't going to score points, and it was incredibly scrappy. This year they're leaving the first race in 4th in the Constructors' Championship. Massive result for Williams, and they should be incredibly happy, and I bet they are incredibly happy. On to another driver who did not start the race, Isaac Hadjar, who qualified 11th, did not start, crashed into the barriers on the formation lap, and I felt so bad for him. My heart really went out to him. He, again, that sort of similar thing, went to accelerate. I think maybe just put a bit too much into it. Again, the torque of the car, and he just lost the car and spun, hit the barrier, and there was no way he could have started the race because he'd broken his rear wing. And it was heartbreaking watching him get out of that car, and you could see that he was so emotional and upset, and he was crying. What I think was maybe a bit much was having a camera in his face pretty much as he went back to the pits. But what was a really endearing moment was seeing Anthony Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton's dad, walking down to sort of go and see Hadjar and make sure he was okay and give him a little bit of reassurance and just a bit of a comforting. Lewis Hamilton is Isaac Hadjar's hero. He's always talking about how much he loves Lewis, and there was a time last year, I think when he did an FP1 session, he was like, I just want to go and, wave to Lewis. I want to go and shake Lewis's hand. He's a huge Lewis Hamilton fan. And I think it was a really sweet moment that Lewis's dad went and was one of the first people to see Hadjar, who was crying, and give him a hug and give him reassurance and, give him that bit of comforting. It was a really touching moment, and it was very emotional, and I did have tears in my eyes. It was 4 o'clock in the morning here. It was all too much for that time of the morning, but it was an incredibly sweet moment, and I think that will stay with Hadjar. In his post-race, you call it a post-race if he didn't start the race? In his interview with Rachel Brooks after the media, you could tell he was just totally devastated and broken. So I feel so bad for him. He looked to be one of the most promising rookies. He had the best qualifying out of all the rookies. He looked like he was going to be having an incredible race, and he just didn't even get to start it. I've seen a lot of backlash against the rookies, and I think we all just have to remember that they are rookies. This is their first time competitively driving Formula One cars, and for the first time they're doing it, it's raining, it's a really greasy, slippery track, so I think we have to give them a little bit of a benefit. I think we have to be a little bit easier on them because they are just rookies. And as I said, there was experienced drivers that were really struggling to keep their cars on the track. So a real big shame for Isaac Hadjar. His teammate Yuki Tsunoda qualified 5th, finished 12th. Yuki Tsunoda, he just kind of, he just wasn't shown really, was he? He picked up a safety car infringement, which was no further investigation for backing off too much during the safety car period. But I don't know what happened that dropped him down the order so much, because there wasn't massive amounts of overtaking because it was such a greasy track and it was incredibly difficult to drive. I think he's just lost out in the carnage and chaos of the safety cars and the pit stops and the impossible decisions that the teams had to make, and maybe it was just slightly the wrong time. Probably a few things that really brought Tsunoda down the line, and it's a shame that he's finished the race outside the points after such a good qualifying. On to Haas and Oliver Bearman, who started in the pits, finished 14th, and Esteban Ocon, who qualified 19th, finished 13th. Now don't get it twisted, Ollie and Esteban were dead last. That Haas looks slow as hell. They had no pace in that car whatsoever. They were absolutely nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. It was actually painful. I think the only time we've seen the both of them was when they were getting lapped. They also made, I think, maybe a slightly wrong decision where they stayed out on intermediates maybe a bit too long. Everyone else had come in and boxed for slicks to go for mediums or hard tyres. Haas made the call to keep them out, and it looked at one point that it might have been the better call because there was rain coming, but it just took a little bit longer for the rain to come, which meant they had to box, put on slick tyres, and it just didn't really work in their favour. Looking back in hindsight, it might have been better to stay on the intermediates, perhaps. I guess we'll never know. The team will have been able to gather a lot of data, and this will probably be one of those outlier races where it's incredibly fast. It's the 4th fastest on the calendar behind Monza, Jeddah and Silverstone. It's a street track. The walls are close. It's a challenging track to drive even in dry conditions. We had changeable conditions. We had wet, and the team will be able to gather a lot of data about the car, but in terms of the sort of track-specific stuff, there won't be a lot of that they'll transfer over to others, because we are going to China next. Massively different track. After China, it's Japan. Massively different track. Then we go to Bahrain, again, incredibly different track, raced under completely different conditions. So I think Haas have got their work cut out for them. I think it is going to be a bit of a struggle for them this year to really understand that car. I have to say, for Oliver Bearman, even though he crashed twice, once you're in FP2, once you're in FP3, completely missed qualifying, to be able to go out there and finish a race like that, even if he's dead last, we'll take it. I just think they need to keep their heads high, move forward, and there's still 23 races left of this season. It is still all to play for. Anything could happen. I'm not losing hope on Haas just yet, but I do hope they find some performance in that car because it is slow. Right, next up, another DNF. Jack Doohan qualified 14th, did not finish. Again, another driver who crashed out on the first lap. Obviously, with the formation lap, Isaac Hadjar had crashed. We then got an aborted start, and on the restart, Jack Doohan, again, think it was the same sort of issue that was plaguing Carlos Sainz. He went to put a bit of power down on the accelerator, and I think, again, an upshift issue, and he got too much torque into the car and just lost control of the car and spun out and hit the barrier. Again, incredibly unfortunate. It seemed to be something that plagued a couple of the drivers, to be honest, and not a great start to his rookie campaign, and not a great result for his home race. There's not much else really to say about Jack Doohan's race, or lack thereof, because I think he only did about 3 corners. His teammate, however, Pierre Gasly, qualified 9th, finished 11th. I think Gasly might have been the driver we've seen the least on track in terms of he just wasn't shown on the broadcast. Again, I think similar to Tsunoda, was probably just caught out by the conditions and the strategy of it all, of when do you pit, when do you not, and just didn't really have it in him to get to get into the points, which is unfortunate for him. Again, not much else to say about Gasly's race because he didn't have much of a race. And again, a decent result that he actually finished. Moving on to the Aston Martins, Lance Stroll, who qualified 13th, finished 6th. I did not have Stroll finishing 6th on my bingo card for this Grand Prix. I genuinely didn't see it coming. And again, a driver that we've seen pretty much nothing of on the broadcast and was just like a silent assassin. He was like a sleeper cell, and he's just managed to appear at the end of the race 6th. And again, incredibly lucky through the DNFs, the do not starts. Aston Martin obviously made the right calls with when to pit him, when to not. And it's paid. He's managed to score some solid points. Unfortunately, his teammate, Fernando Alonso, who qualified 12th, did not finish. Alonso just didn't really have a great time out there. He was one of the drivers, I said earlier on, quite a few of the drivers were either hitting the white lines on the curbs or touching the grass, and just sort of, it really unsteadied the car. He touched the curb just coming into turn 7, and it just unsteadied the car. He lost control and he spun straight into the barrier. The bit that really made me nervous through that whole situation, Alonso's crash obviously deployed the safety car because they had to sort of slow everyone down whilst they recovered the vehicle. Now, usually in these situations, what you'll see is cranes that will come to the side of the track and they'll lift the car up and over. Usually when this sort of stuff happens, they're not on the track, they've gotten onto a bit of a runoff, and you can get by under safety car conditions. It was an incredibly wet and greasy, slippy track, and we had a removal vehicle on the track at a point where there's not a lot of room. There was people stood on the track getting Alonso's car off as the safety car and all of these drivers were going around. I have to say, I think it was incredibly dangerous for that to happen, and everyone at some point in that race lost control of their car. It was incredibly slippy, the track was incredibly greasy, and all it could have taken was for one driver just to catch something and lose control of the car, and we could have had a real serious incident on our hands. At that point, I understand it's not ideal for everyone or anyone, but I do believe we should have had a red flag just to completely neutralise everything, bring everyone back into the pit and allow the teams just to go and get Alonso's car safely. And there was nothing about that was safe, and it really put me on the edge. Right, moving into the top few teams, and we have Kimi Antonelli, who qualified 16th, finished 4th, was demoted to 6th, and then was re-promoted back to 4th through a reversal of a penalty. Now, first of all, I just have to say, an incredible debut race for Kimi Antonelli. I was not expecting much after qualifying, and I actually should have just held my tongue and shut up, because my God, that was amazing. He came out of the bat, he kept his race clean, he did some incredible moves. He dove down the inside of Nico Hülkenberg, I think twice. He was lapping considerably faster than a lot of the drivers in front of him that were at the top of the field, and he did amazingly. So good. It was so nice to see. And the fact that on his first race in those conditions, he's gone from 16th to 4th, oh my God. It was an absolutely stellar drive from Kimi Antonelli, and especially with the amount of pressure that's on his shoulders, having replaced Lewis Hamilton, being 18, not having the best Formula 2 season. He only did one season of F2. There is a lot of pressure on Antonelli to perform. And, you know, if he didn't perform, there would be all these questions of, have Mercedes made the right choice, and blah, 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 blah. Today's performance shows that actually Mercedes most likely have made the right choice. It was an absolutely stellar drive. And now, as I said, he finished on the track 4th, was demoted to 5th, and then promoted back to 4th. That was because he got a 5-second time penalty for an unsafe release into the pits, and the stewards deemed that it was he could have had a collision with Nico Hülkenberg. Mercedes put in the right to review and brought new footage, and the stewards reviewed footage from the roll hoop camera where they could see that Antonelli had gone a significant amount of time without entering the fast lane, had checked his mirrors to make sure he was clear of Nico Hülkenberg, and had joined the fast lane, posing no threat to the McLaren mechanics that were outside the pit garage. So he got his 5-second time penalty reversed, and Antonelli has the best result of a debutant racer since Kevin Magnussen in 2014. So, well fucking done to Kimi Antonelli, because that was an absolutely stellar performance and he should be very, very happy with himself, which I imagine he is. Alright, his teammate George Russell, who qualified 4th, finished 3rd. Russell was just kind of in his own little world for most of that race, wasn't he? He had a bit of a gap to the cars in front of him. He had a bit of a gap to the cars behind him. He was able to just run his own race, and he was there to pick up the position from Oscar Piastri having a bit of a nightmare to get him a P3, to get him on the podium for the first race. So Mercedes are going to be very bloody happy at George Russell and Kimi Antonelli for their results. George ran a very good race, kept his nose clean, kept himself out of trouble, kept his car on the tarmac, and brought home a podium for the team. So they should be incredibly happy with themselves. Now, I believe that with Russell's P3 finish and Antonelli getting promoted back to 4th, it means that Mercedes are actually tied on points with McLaren. So that is an incredible result, a fantastic result for Mercedes, and a complete switch from where we were last year. What will be interesting is when we go to China, how they get on. It's forecast to be about 24 degrees. We know that Mercedes likes the colder temperatures. It performed well today in the cooler temperatures with the rain and everything. So it will be very interesting to see how they get on at a dry, hopefully dry, there's no rain forecast, a dry, warmer race. Even though, to be fair, his qualifying performance was decent. George's, that is. George's qualifying performance was decent. So there's a bit of an unknown with the Mercedes yet, and I think it'll be a few races before we have a sort of solid idea of the actual performance of that car. Moving on to the Red Bulls, and Liam Lawson, who qualified 18th, started from the pit lane, did not finish. Now, Lawson had to start from the pits because the team decided to change the beam on the rear wing, which is obviously breaking Parc Fermé. I don't know quite what's going on with Liam Lawson, to be honest with you. It's clear that he's just not comfortable in that car whatsoever. His crash had the same, I think it was the same issue as sort of Isaac Hadjar had, where he was just putting a bit too much maybe into the acceleration, and the car just reacted in a way and he spun out and hit the barrier, actually at the exact same spot as Hadjar, and he broke his rear wing as well. What's interesting to me is he had zero pace through the laps that he did do. He was off the pace massively. Liam Lawson in a Red Bull was hanging around with the two Haas drivers. Again, we are racing with very specific circumstances. Australia is a specific track, it is raining, it's not usual conditions, but there's just something happening with Liam Lawson, and I can't put my finger on it because he was so off the pace. Obviously, he's not comfortable in that car, and it showed because he couldn't control it and ended up crashing the car. Now, similar to qualifying, this is not the results that Red Bull are going to be wanting. I think the only thing that's helping Red Bull, they're sitting 3rd in the constructors, the only thing that's helping Red Bull is that all the big points were kind of scored by at least one driver. McLaren's big points were all scored by Lando Norris. Mercedes, yes, had 2 drivers, but Red Bull's 18 points were all picked up by Max Verstappen. If they have the ambition to go and win that Constructors, they cannot just rely on Max. They're going to need Lawson to be scoring big points because the field is too tight to only have Max scoring points. So I'm very intrigued to see what happens with Liam Lawson going into these next few races. He has to give it his all, and I just feel like there's something that's not sitting right. Again, as I said, that car is extremely difficult to drive, I can see that, but he was massively off the pace, so I'd be intrigued to see when we go to a drier race how he gets on. His teammate Max Verstappen, who qualified 3rd, finished 2nd. I have to say Max put on an incredible show. It was an incredible drive for Max, and I think he did know when to try and put the fight in and when not. We have seen in the past where Max will just absolutely welly it and will just get his elbows out and really fight. This was not one of those occasions. I think he took a little bit more of a measured approach. He didn't pull any crazy moves, and he did just bide his time. It was almost as if he was letting the race come to him. He put in an incredible fight to Lando Norris, and he was right there to capitalise on Oscar's misfortunes, shall we say. He put in a good fight, and I do think we have an interesting battle between Max and Lando, Max v Lando Part 2, coming up this year. Max doesn't seem to have the same struggles as Liam does with the car. Max is way more in control of that car than Liam is, and I think Max did an excellent job out there today. And I think the biggest issue for Max was that the Red Bull just wasn't as fast as the McLaren, and he just couldn't catch up to Lando, because Lando actually had damage, which did slow him down slightly, but Max just couldn't get close enough to Lando to really put a move, even when he had the DRS. All right, Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton, who qualified 8th, finished 10th, and Charles Leclerc, who qualified 7th, finished 8th. I think it's safe to say that Ferrari, yes, have questionable strategies, and the drivers are suffering because of that. But I think what is clear now more than ever is Ferrari have a serious communication problem. Not just between driver and their race engineer, which I don't believe is too much of a problem, because Brian and Charles have a very solid relationship and have worked together for long enough now. They've got that down pat. We obviously seen a lot more of an interaction between Lewis Hamilton and his new race engineer, Riccardo Adami, who used to be Carlos Sainz's engineer, and that relationship will take a bit of work. Riccardo is obviously used to giving a certain amount and type of information to Carlos Sainz, which will be completely different to the amount and type of information that Lewis Hamilton wants. Lewis will want to hear specific things, and it will just take a bit of time, Lewis and Riccardo, to work out exactly what needs to be shared back and forward. Because there was moments where Riccardo Adami was telling Lewis things, and Lewis was like, I don't need to hear it. You're giving me too much information, enough. And I do think probably sometime between now and China, there will be a sit down between the two of them where they go through exactly what needs to be shared over the radio. Where I think the communication is a big issue is amongst the team themselves on that pit wall, because we heard Brian telling Charles one thing about the weather and Riccardo Adami telling Lewis something completely different. Just seemed like there was a lack of communication happening on the pit wall between those that are sat there. I think Ferrari played a risky game and it didn't pay off. It was clear that Ferrari sort of thought that that secondary rain shower that came in towards the end was just going to be short and it would pass and they could stay out on slicks, even though Brian Bodze had told Charles Leclerc that it was going to be like class 3. They decided to try and leave the drivers out on slicks, but I just don't think they realised how much water was going to come down onto the track, even though Brian Bodze had told Charles Leclerc that it was going to be a lot of water. So I just don't understand the decision making. I'm very disappointed by Ferrari, because I thought we were sorting this stuff out, and they came into this season and there was such a hype around them. They had an incredible driving pairing. There was so much hype around this car. And they've come out of this first race, and I actually think they're a little bit of a laughing stock. Like, they look to be a bit of a joke. They are 7th in the standings. They're behind Sauber. Like, in what world does that make sense? I'm going to need Ferrari to pull it together, to be quite honest, and sort it out, because that was painfully bad to watch. And once again, as I said, Ferrari's strategy calls just don't make sense. They took a gamble to stay on the slicks and it didn't pay off, with a huge spin for Charles Leclerc that just lost in position. So a painful one for Ferrari, a painful one to be a Ferrari fan, but on to the next, as they say. The whole thing is actually just a race that I would and I think Ferrari would want to forget. Hopefully they manage to pull their shit together by next week when we go to China. McLaren, Oscar Piastri, who qualified 2nd, finished 9th. Incredibly unfortunate for Oscar Piastri, who was running a very, very, very good race, and we were on track for a McLaren 1-2, but it was just all undone in that one mistake. Oscar was coming round the final few corners and had basically just followed Lando, but unfortunately Lando had gone off the track and Oscar just followed him off the track as well, and just his whole race was just undone then. He got back onto the track. He's very lucky, and so is Max Verstappen, that they didn't collide because it was very close. Because when Oscar came back onto the track, he just lost the car and he just slid straight off onto the grass, and he could have very easily hit Max. He then got stuck on the grass and had to reverse out of the grass and then pit and change his tyres. And all of that time that he was spent beached in the grass, trying to reverse out, getting into the pits, it just plummeted him right the way down to, I think he rejoined the race P10, P11. He did a couple of fantastic overtakes to get into P9. A special mention to his overtake on Lewis Hamilton on the final lap. It was a thing of beauty. I think it was an overtake that shows just how much, is it respect the word I'm looking for? Or how much trust Oscar has in Lewis and Lewis has in Oscar to complete an overtake like that. So a great overtake, such a shame. There was every chance that he could have been a home race winner, and that one mistake just undid everything for him. We also got a lot of talk about papaya rules and team orders, and if there's one phrase I'm sick to the back teeth of hearing, it's papaya fucking rules. My God. Obviously, it was a huge talking point last year, papaya rules and whatever, and I don't know how clear the team have to make it, how much more clearer than they already have made it. Papaya rules literally means no team orders. No team orders. It is race your teammate, race them hard, but race them clean. Do not do anything that could screw over you, your teammate, or the team as a whole. And I just don't understand how much more clearer Zach or Lando or Oscar or Andrea or whoever else the media seem to ask about this have to make it before we stop asking the same goddamn questions all the time. I can't tell you how many times this morning alone, before the race, I heard someone from the Sky commentating team, the Sky F1 team, asking a McLaren about papaya goddamn rules. Jesus. I've also seen a lot about the supposed team orders that McLaren put in on Oscar Piastri when they told him to hold position. And it's, oh, they're already favouring Lando and all this kind of stuff. I just don't understand where people are getting this information from. And are we all just jumping to conclusions that McLaren as a team are just sabotaging Oscar's race because they want Lando to go and win? Is that what you think's happening? Because I can assure you it's not. Because if you look at the actual radio message, if you listen to the radio message, they literally say, Oscar, hold position whilst we clear the back markers. They didn't want Oscar and Lando to be fighting for the lead of the race whilst also trying to get through the back markers at the same time. Because once they had cleared both the Haas drivers, there was quite a gap before they reached Liam Lawson. After they had overtaken the Haas drivers, they were back over the radio saying, you're free to go and race. They're not trying to sabotage Oscar in favour of Lando. Take your tinfoil hats off. Alright, and finally, Lando Norris, who qualified first and finished first. Our first race winner of 2025, and what a win it was. He was probably one of the most impressive drives from Lando Norris, I think, in his entirety of F1. Genuinely one of the most impressive. He kept it clean, he kept himself composed, he didn't take any huge risks. Yes, he did have a bit of an issue where he ran wide over the grass and the gravel, but he managed to get it back onto the track. He pitted the car and he suffered no real consequences from it. I think this was a fantastic drive of Lando's, one of the best we've seen from him, and he deserves that win. It is very clear to see that McLaren is the fastest car so far this year. Obviously, things might change with upgrades and whatever, and, you know, future developments for the other teams, but right now, that McLaren is the fastest. Lando also did an incredible job with that car. So the praise should be on both Lando and the car. It's not all just about having the fastest car. it does require skill, especially in those conditions, and Lando showed he has that skill. I also think it's safe to say that he has perfected his race start, shall we say, because he had a solid race start the first time, he had a solid race start the second time, and he managed to also do very clean restarts and retain the leads. And he didn't let the pressure of a Max or whoever else breathing down his neck cause any real problems. Apparently he did suffer some damage after his little excursion off the track, but again, didn't let it hamper him, and he went and delivered a solid result for the team. Lando getting P1 also means that he is leading the Drivers' Championship, which means that for the first time since the 22nd of May 2022, a driver other than Max Verstappen is leading the championship. It has been 1,029 days since someone other than Max Verstappen has led the championship. Verstappen had not been behind in the standings since before the Spanish Grand Prix in 2022. And Lando Norris has just broken that, so well done, Lando. And that is everything from us from a crazy season opener. We will be back within a matter of days for our predictions for next week's Chinese Grand Prix. It is the first sprint weekend of the season, and crazy that the second race of the year we're getting a sprint on a track that I don't think has ever had a sprint race before. Last year was the first race in 5 years, I think it was, and we've got like 6 rookies, so it's going to be incredibly difficult for everyone because not only is it the second race, it's a sprint weekend, we've got 1 practice. It's just a lot. So that is going to be an interesting one. But we'll be back with our predictions very soon. But let me know what you thought of the Australian Grand Prix in the comments down below. And also let me know if you have any predictions for the Chinese Grand Prix and sprint race coming up next week. We'll see you very soon. Have a lovely rest of your day. Love you. Bye.